On Thursday, Scottish First Minister and SNP leader John Swinner met with Plaid Cymru leader Rhun in Edinburgh to discuss how the Scottish and Welsh parties could work together to put forward a, quote, positive alternative to Westminster's despair and decline, signalling a potential progressive alliance between the two pro-independence parties. With the SNP looking to continue its winning streak at next year's parliamentary election, Plaid hoping to become the largest party in Wales for the first time ever next year, and Sinn Féin currently the largest party in Northern Ireland, there's a real possibility that every devolved UK nation will soon be led by parties that want to leave the UK. So in this video, we're going to explore what an SNP-Plaid Celtic alliance might look like, why Plaid hopes to emulate the SNP's past trajectory, and what all of this means for British politics. Never miss an episode and always feel in the loop by subscribing and ringing the bell. Plaid Cymru and the Scottish National Party are by no means strangers to each other. In fact, in their own words, the two parties share a long history bound by a common cause: to forge fairer and more prosperous nations through independence. Having collaborated in Parliament as early as the 1980s, in 2001 the two parties formed a joint parliamentary grouping in Westminster, dubbed a Celtic Alliance, which with 9 MPs, 4 Plaid and 5 SNP, made it the third biggest opposition grouping in the Commons, after the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats. At the time, the two parties said that it would allow them to make a more powerful case for the people of Scotland and Wales, punch above their weight, and to lead the opposition to what it called the new Labour government's assault on public services. Nearly a decade later, ahead of the 2010 election, the SNP and Plaid agreed a 4-point programme that they would jointly press for in the event of a hung parliament, hoping that they could win concessions if their support was needed on a vote-by-vote basis. The parties were also chummy with each other in the run-up to the 2015 election, when a Labour minority government looked like a possibility. And over the years, Plaid and SNP leaders and politicians have spoken at each other's party conferences, highlighting their shared vision of independence and the relationship between what Nicola Sturgeon described as sister parties. So you get the idea. Plaid-SNP cooperation is nothing new, but this time things are different. There's a real prospect, but by no means guaranteed, that come May 2026, the two nationalist parties will be their nation's largest parties. In Scotland, the SNP seems to have recovered from a period of turmoil and its disastrous 2024 general election result, and its current polling lead suggests that it will remain the largest party at next year's Scottish parliamentary election, even if it falls short of a majority, while Reform is neck and neck with Labour for second place. Meanwhile, in Wales, Plaid Cymru are in with a fighting chance of ending Labour's long dominance of Wales, to become the largest party in the Senedd and lead the Welsh government for the first time, though likely requiring support from smaller parties. Recent polling suggests a two-horse race between Plaid and Reform, and Plaid's historic Caerphilly by-election victory a few weeks ago has further boosted the party's confidence. By the way, if you're interested as to why Plaid is rising and Labour declining in Wales, you can watch our previous videos on that topic, which are linked in the description. Anyway, against this backdrop, what have Plaid and the SNP actually said about this new or renewed alliance? Well, unlike in the past, they're not talking about cooperation in Westminster, but rather cooperation between two nationalist devolved governments against Westminster. SNP leader John Swinner said after the meeting on Thursday that the UK's Labour government had been an unmitigated disaster for Scotland and Wales, adding that a progressive alliance between the Scottish government and a Plaid-led Welsh government would see the two work collaboratively on issues such as child poverty, with Plaid having already pledged a pilot version of the Scottish child payment in Wales if it enters government next year. Swinney additionally said that the alliance would also entail working together to resist the consuming of our politics by the far right, which he says is happening in Westminster, with Reform's politics consuming Labour and the Conservatives. Plaid leader Iorwerth, meanwhile, said that Plaid and SNP victories next year would serve as a wake-up call for the UK's Labour government, and resulting in a powerful bloc that could, quote, demand that Wales get parity of funding and powers with Scotland. For context, unlike in Scotland, things like policing, justice, and control over the Crown Estate are not devolved in Wales. But based on what Swinney and Iorwerth have said, there isn't really much formality in this alliance. In practice, it looks more like an avenue for dialogue, a sharing of ideas, and joint advocacy on issues. Plaid, though, will be hoping that they can emulate the SNP's trajectory in the 2000s and 2010s, when the party dislodged Labour from its position of dominance and went from an opposition party to a party of government, eventually securing an independence referendum that, while unsuccessful, nevertheless fueled the SNP and drove independence and Scottish politics up the agenda. Unlike the SNP, Plaid never really had that kind of post-devolution breakthrough, but sees 2026 as its best shot yet. But while the SNP's electoral record and longevity is impressive, having governed Scotland for 18 years now, there are parts of the SNP's record that Plaid will be very wary of associating itself too closely with. For example, the latest Scottish Social Attitudes Survey found that satisfaction with the NHS and trust in the Scottish Government has fallen to all-time lows. Nevertheless, both centre-left parties clearly see the growth of Nigel Farage's reform in England and their own respective nations, and the two traditional parties' rightward shift in response, as a potentially powerful force to use to their advantage, pitching themselves as the only parties that can and will challenge reform's rise. And whether you agree with it or not, arguing that independence can deliver Scotland and Wales from what they see as Anglo-centric nationalism. This obviously poses a problem for the two traditionally mainstream unionist parties, Labour and the Tories. Reform usurping the Tories in England, Wales and Scotland is evidently catastrophic for the Tories, but if Plaid becomes the party of choice for the centre-left in Wales instead of Labour, as the SNP previously did in Scotland, then it would make UK Labour's task of remaining in power a whole lot harder, with a path to victory restricted to just England if it cannot fall back on Welsh or Scottish seats. Although even now in England too, the party is being challenged from its left by a growing Green Party. If we do end up in a situation next year where the SNP, Plaid Cymru and Sinn Féin are leading each of the devolved government in the so-called Celtic fringe, it's hard to see the status quo being sustainable, as it's anything but a ringing endorsement of the union. But what actually follows from that, what comes next, is much more uncertain. If you're interested in learning more about this topic, then there's plenty of other outlets reporting on it online. But what about everything you don't see? Or what about the sources you've grown to trust that are purposefully leaving out information? Thankfully, our sponsor this week, Ground News, are experts at lifting the veil on media bias. That's because Ground News is a website and app that gathers thousands of articles from across the world, expertly merging all different sides of political bias into one place, making it simple to see multiple perspectives on the same event. In addition, every single story comes with a detailed view of the bias distribution, factuality scores, and even specific ownership information. For example, if we take this story on Plaid Cymru winning the Caerphilly by-election, you can see that 88 sources are reporting on it, and it's all featured here in one place. In fact, if we delve a bit deeper, we can see that most of the coverage is coming from the centre. While it would normally be overwhelming to sift through thousands of articles to find out how they're being reported differently by either side, Ground News offers a handy bias comparison feature where you can do this with a click of a button. For instance, if we go back to the story on the Caerphilly by-election, we're able to learn that the left emphasises a local victory, while the right amplifies the national stakes of the election. But that's not all. For stories that have been disproportionately covered by one side of the political spectrum or the other, their aptly named blind spot feed puts all of those into one place to help you stay grounded and informed. So if you want to begin questioning the narrative instead of just consuming it, you can get started today as we're partnering with Ground News to offer you 40% off their unlimited access Vantage plan. Just subscribe through the link in the description or scan the QR code on screen, and you'll be supporting an independent news platform working to make the media landscape more transparent.